So I'll stop talking now. First session from Paul, which is talking about all about how you can generate documents and send communications and even take payments with Power Automate. So Paul, if you're ready, I will hand over to you.
I am ready.
Stop sharing.
Thank you.
Awesome.
How long have I got?
As long as you like, really. Sort of probably 40 minutes.
All right.
You know,
well,
just
it
looking at the time,
just depends
like
on
that.
the level of detail I'll go into. But I'll share my screen.
Okay, cool.
Let me know if you can see that.
Yes, we can. I can.
Yeah.
So what I am going to demonstrate is some uses for the HTTP connector in Power Automate and how you can use that to get around some of the limitations in Power Automate. So I'm going to start with quite a complicated example and then show you what it does and then explain the reasons why I did it this way. And then we'll work backwards to some more basic examples. So I'm just going to run this flow now. This might only my second time speaking at one of these things, by the way, so forgive me if I rush or do some stupid things. So the two examples, one will use SharePoint as a data source and the other one is Dataverse. So if we look at this SharePoint list, we've got the details, the header details of an invoice here, and we've got the lines of it here. Now, running that flow will have sent me an email. And here's the email, and it says, please click here to view the invoice. The invoice is not attached. So if I click on that, now this has loaded up the invoice directly from a flow. The flow is the web server effectively. Now this is where you get into working around some of the limitations that Power Automate gives you, because when you're in a browser, you've suddenly got access to everything a browser has got. And so if we look at this now, we can see that there's some, if I press print, then the first thing I've worked around is the inability to accurately convert HTML to PDF in Power Automate. If you've tried it, you'll see that that process can be a bit fraught with problems. So I can just save it as a PDF straight from here, and it'll immediately have the right file name as given to it by the by the HTML. And the HTML for this is actually pretty basic. This invoice template I just took from a template online and just modified it a little bit. So if we go down to the bottom, we can see there's a couple other functions. I can put a query into here and send that query in. In fact, I've done something wrong there. Let's just try that again. And so it'll just say, thank you, your query has been received. Now in Teams, you can see I've just had an alert and the flow bot sent me a message to say customer invoice query received. We do not want to pay as something was broken on delivery, and links me to the invoice. So that, when I submit that, that is actually using JQuery to submit into another flow, which we'll go into in a minute. And they're all dead basic flows, these. So if the customer is happy to pay the invoice, they can just click pay invoice, click on PayPal. Now, when I did this for real, it was actually integrated with Stripe, but I'm just going to use my PayPal sandbox account. So that's gone off to PayPal now. And what PayPal's going to do once they've authorized it, we go back to here, sorry, there. They're going to send back the authorization code, the PayPal ID, and the authorization. And that doesn't happen straight away. It takes, okay, it's just come through. So the first thing that happened, if I reset this, viewed would have been not ticked. This is a Boolean here. So when we just view this page, that's enough to trigger the fact that that invoice has been viewed. So if someone says, oh, we haven't paid it because we didn't get the invoice. Well, you did view it, but you wouldn't say that, but you might know that it's been viewed. And then you just tick when it's been paid and you've got the PayPal transaction ID and the money comes into your account. So that is quite a powerful way of using Power Automate to just get documents out there in exactly the format that you want to have it out. Now, if we go back to it, you will see that when this was created, it had a GUID assigned to it, and the customer account code is around somewhere there. So if we look in the URL, you can see that the GUID is here and the customer ID is here. So if I change the GUID, I'll just take that D off. It'll just say document not found. So it's not super secure, but and then once it's been viewed, then you can just say you don't want it to be viewable again. So it's only a one-time thing. So we'll just have a look at the flows behind that, because it's actually a bunch of flows. And then you'll start to understand how it works. So I don't actually know which one it is, this one. So the first step is always when a HTTP request is received, and this is the only GET type request in this, all the others are posts. Okay. So there's something important to bear in mind when you are doing something like this. The browser is expecting a response pretty quickly. If you can see, I've just refreshed it and the pay button has gone because it's said this one's already paid, so you can't repay it. So any actions between here and response need to be as short as possible. So you can't have an apply to each in here or something that takes a long time. But after the response, you can then do what you want. And I use this technique quite a lot on a number of different flows. You respond to the client as quickly as possible, but after that, just do what you want. So this is a dead simple flow. When a HTTP request is received, there's nothing in here. The only options in here are the relative paths to get the GUID and the customer ID. This is just the PayPal ID for sending off to PayPal. And then we've got this HTML response, which is just a string, because that gets updated in the condition. So we get the details of the invoice header, which is those details that we saw earlier, this stuff here. And then if it's found, i.e. if it's got some GUID equals GUID and customer ID equals customer ID, if it is found, then we go into this generate invoice scope. If it isn't found, then we just go to that document not found HTML, and this is just HTML plopped in there. It's just completely static. So when we go to generate invoice, I get the lines, it goes into a select, and this is a good example of where you need to do something fast. So that select is creating the individual HTML rows. I can't really use get HTML. I can't really use create a table action because it wouldn't fit in with the rest of the table, but we can construct it there instead. Then the array output of the select is created. The HTML is then defined as the output of this. HTML is more or less static, just with a few variables in there. Here comes the header data, and then the rows will be down a bit further down here. I don't want to go through the HTML because it's, you know, this isn't the time or the place for it, and you might already know that stuff. But basically, it was just the HTML that I had in my local browser, and I just replaced each bit with expressions, and then away you go. So then, as you can see, the response is sent. It's just the variable HTML response. And then after that, update seen. We're doing the update item to say that the status of that is now seen, that it's been viewed, and then the list gets updated. So the point about this is, and this is even more relevant in the next demo I'm going to give you, that this would be quite difficult to get into if you didn't have any HTML or JavaScript experience, but it is still low code. There's nothing in here that's particularly complicated, and it's mostly being driven by Power Automate. And honestly, all of that stuff in here, the stuff that I just copied from other places, I didn't really make any of it. I just put it all together. And so it's pretty easy to do. The PayPal integration was a bit tricky, but let's just look at some of the other flows associated with it. So receiving the PayPal data, again, that's very simple. That's just a webhook from PayPal. You tell it what event, and Stripe works in exactly the same way. So I've got PayPal configured to say when you've received payment, send a message to this address. Is the it doesn't send that much information. I've done a compose, and that was just for troubleshooting. And then we just find the SharePoint item and then update the field with the relevant information. You guys probably already know this, but this is quite a neat trick. When you do an update item on SharePoint, as we saw in the previous flow, actually, update scene, it forces you into sometimes update. It gives you this entire list of fields, which you can't get away from. But if you go into here and just change the list name to a string, so it doesn't know necessarily what table, what list you're updating, you can then just type the field names in with your new value, and that just gives you a much neater looking flow, especially on tables or lists that have got a lot of fields. So that's just quite a neat little way of doing it. And then the customer invoice query is exactly the same. I mean, if you want to see the JavaScript for it, let me know and I'll show you. It's only a couple of lines. And again, this just receives a HTTP post and then sends an adaptive card. Exactly the same. This one responds immediately. So it does, when the HTTP request is received, respond back to the browser, message received. It's just a HTTP 200 to say, look, it worked. Then it does, it's looking up at the item, gets the link to the item from SharePoint, and then posts the adaptive card back to say, someone's queried this invoice, can you do something with it? Now, this action item could be anything that you want, but this whole ability to use Power Automate as a web server does open up a lot of possibilities. I'm going to show you the other one actually now, and then because I think this will generate a few questions, we'll go back and see what those are. So before I show you the demo, I'm going to show you a Power App which I made for a customer, which they use constantly, which enables them to look at any document that their system has generated. And these documents are generated in Power Automate from a business system completely outside of the Microsoft stack. And so they can go through any document they like here. Now, Power Apps is obviously a low-code platform, but this app was actually quite a lot of work. It looks fairly simple, but there's quite a lot going on there, and there's quite a lot of data going into it. And the reason I mention it is because I'm going to show you another way of viewing the same data in a browser, which is just crude. I made it today in sort of 20 minutes to show you how quickly sometimes you can do things outside of Power Platform, and they can be just as effective. So if we look at this one, this is a JQuery Grid that is pulling data straight out of Dataverse. And that is the same data that we were just looking at in that Power App. Now, the JQuery Grid doesn't look that exciting at first until you sort of play with it and see some of the functionality that's built in. So if I want to group this, this is just now a list of documents. If I grab recipient type, put it into the group by column, suddenly it's grouped by customers or suppliers. And then I could expand that out, and this is the document type, pro forma invoice, sample invoice. So I can get that and put that on the group by column as well. Now, this really was low code. I put this together in about 20 minutes, and the code for this is about 15 lines long. So let's just, now this is the flow that drives it. When a HTTP request is received, list rows, that's the table the information is in. I'm bringing back 1500 rows. And you can paginate this as well. So when you get to the end of your 1500 rows, it continues on. We got a select action to reformat that into a JSON array and then just respond to the browser. So that is, I'm just going to refresh that because I think it's pretty impressive. 1500 rows while we've got that loading spinner, and then you get your data. Now there are loads of different ways you can use this, but you certainly couldn't manipulate 1500 rows in a lot of different parts of Power Platform that easily. So again, I'll break it down by there and then by the type. Okay, so now I'm looking for an invoice. And I could do it by account code as well. So I could put that there. So now I can see invoices by account, or I could move account code across and then see they've had an invoice and a picking sheet. And then on top of that, I could just go up here, and if I was looking for that 247 blah, 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 in fact, let's ungroup everything, because then you'll see how quick it is. So I'll search for this. This is the account code. If I just put in X0, and you'll see it start to break things down, 141, and then you'll see how quick it is. If I search for a particular document, I can go 284067, for example, and then we get straight to that invoice. Then I can click on the PDF because there is a PDF associated with it, and I'll get straight to the document. Again, I can choose different columns. So I could put the GUID on there if I wanted to. I just put that in there to show it. Don't actually know how to remove a column though. There we go, like that. And then you can do filters as well. So you can say account code. I just want to see that one. Or I just want to see customers. And I only want to see invoices. So this is good and it all works. But that took me like over a week to make. And that took about 20 minutes. So sometimes when you can leverage things that other people have already made, i.e. this JavaScript grid, you can save bags of time and have something that's really responsive because you're leveraging the power of whatever's built into everybody's browsers already. And I will just view the source of this because the whole thing is in the source. So the most complicated part is this, columns, because I'm just changing the output that's coming from Power Automate. But then you don't even need that, by the way. You can leave it out and it will just default it to whatever the JSON is. It is basically this little bit of JSON here. And that's it. A couple of script tags that link off to JQuery and this, which links to the JavaScript grid itself. And I think that's super powerful. So I don't know how much detail you want me to go into. I'll show you one more flow, actually, because it's related to something somebody asked me yesterday. So many flows. So this is a dead simple one. This one does next to nothing. So you might be wondering why I'm showing it to you. I'm going to do and test equals 1, 2, 3. So this is, I'm just receiving a HTTP request and passing a value to it. At the end, I'm just putting ampersand test and then something, and then echoing that back. The reason is because this is all you really need to get started. When a HTTP request is received, here I'm bringing out the value of test, which is trigger outputs queries test, and then sending a response. That's how simple my HTML boilerplate is. And all I've done is put the output of that there. So you can see how quickly you can make something that does something. Clearly in this case, it doesn't do a lot, but from just getting a few values from a query string or from the URL, which you would do this relative path element, you can do all sorts of stuff. Now, I have actually experimented, and with the other demo I gave, I did updating, adding new rows into Dataverse, and all that kind of stuff, because these are all editable if you want them to be, and you just need an endpoint for it to connect to write the updates. So I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat to see if there's no, wrong one. Yeah, if there's any questions. But I'm quite interested to know what the actual, if you think this is a good idea, or if I'm just sort of building this and there is an interest for it. But it's quite an interesting use case, I think. Do you want me to go into detail about how it works a bit more explicitly, or do you all get it? Because I'm not sure what the level of expertise is.
See Mike's got his hand up if you want to ask a question, Mike.
It was more around love it all.
Yeah.
And I also have been hacking around by shoving HTML into responses at the end because I'm lazy and I don't like doing my timesheets. So I found a way to get the flow to do my timesheets for me and then respond back to me. Yeah, the question I posted in chat was, you know, the kind of the URL that gets generated by the flow when you create it. That's kind of, I think, is a one-shot deal. It only gets generated with the first time you create that trigger, I think. And there's effectively a token or a key that's part of that URL that I've not found a way to change. And my worry has been, for example, in your example, PayPal calls that flow back to say, yeah, success, payment has been made. If someone was to intercept that, they could go through all the invoices and go, haha, I'm just going to send it to some JSON and, you know, make it look like all the invoices have been paid. So I'd want to take that relatively frequently. And when I've done it in other scenarios, I've not found a way to do it. And that's probably because I'm not a genius. There's probably a button somewhere I'm missing. But what I've ended up doing is every time the flow gets called, to kind of revalidate that back by telling, for example, in this case, PayPal, an additional parameter that it would pass. You know, in your HTML5 boilerplate thing, I'd give it another parameter there that I'd then validate against Key Vault, and I would change that occasionally. And it just felt a bit clunky, but slightly better.
So I mean, that is a valid problem. The other thing that I've done, if I didn't do it in this example, but I did a blog post on how to secure it within the trigger action. And so you can pass an edit. So in the example I just gave, I effectively secured it by using the GUID of the document and the customer ID. So if those things don't match, then you're not getting through. But you can. So in this one, I put my own run key and the value of it. So I had a HTTP header sent to it called run key, and then a value in there, which won't update every time, of course, it's still static, but that has to be sent in the header for this to even trigger.
Got you. And so if, for example, someone didn't like me and decided to just keep spamming it until eventually they got something, but each time is obviously presumably costing me because it's running my flow, this doesn't trigger the flow.
This doesn't trigger the flow. So that blocks really that from ever happening.
Can you dynamically put that key in there if you were to draw it from somewhere that just to make key rotation?
No, because it'd be in the trigger action.
Yeah, so you can't create a trigger direction. Yeah, okay. But still a lot better than I was doing.
Yeah. The downside of this is, you see, if you forget that question mark there and then try and run the flow, the error message you get back tells the receiving client, I expected run key, and this was the value I expected. So you have to be sure to put the question mark to make it null.
I should know by now to read your blog more regularly as well. Apologies.
It's an old post. And so, I mean, I did exactly the same trick as this. So I did a whole load of blog posts about now, if we come down to here, you'll see that down. This is not the right page. It's this one. Now, this is exactly the same demo that we were looking at earlier, but this is bringing back 17,000 rows of data from SharePoint. So it takes a little bit longer, but the code is exactly the same. So you can see I changed the page size to 500. You see how quick that is? That's already loaded all of that stuff out from SharePoint. And we could search for anything in there or group it however we wanted. So if we go up here, we can put the brand on there, and then we've got our 4 brands of data. So again, this was exactly the same demo. I simplified it a bit for the Dataverse example that I just showed you, but I think this might be 5,000 items actually, but whatever, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Coming straight back into the browser. And this was actually for a company called Haven Holidays that had some data in SharePoint that they needed a way of displaying. Now, I didn't do it exactly like this, but I did use this same JavaScript grid because there's not really a way, because of the SharePoint 5000 view limit, to be able to get that on the screen in one go, if you like.
But you're iterating through calls to SharePoint, creating a kind of a variable that contains all those, and then pushing them through to your grid.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
And that whole blog post is all about how to do that fast, because if you do that the standard way, I think it was about 10 minutes, and I got it down to about 9 seconds with parallel branches and all sorts of other stuff. I won't go through all that because we've already gone off the tangent quite far.
I also learned the thing I most wanted to learn, so thank you.
Okay. Have I got questions to read?
So questions-wise, there was another question which I think you might have answered already from Victor, which was around, let me try and find it again. Oh yeah, the invoice page, where is it hosted, which is basically shooting back the HTML in the response, right?
Okay. Yeah. So everyone asks that actually. Everyone.
It's like Voodoo. It's like, how does that work? Yeah.
So solutions. It's in. I got so many flows. I put it into a solution because I kept losing them.
Well done.
So. Yeah, this one. No, that is not it. Sorry, it's that one. So it is hosted on Power Automate is the answer. So this first step, as we were just discussing in the previous conversation, when you add, in fact, do you know what? Let's just make one, and then you'll see what I mean. So if I create a new flow, if I say when a HTTP, where is it? When a HTTP request is received.
Yeah.
Now, you can see it's got no URL there at all. I'm just going to put a response action there. I'm just going to type hello. This is going to come out a bit strange, but we'll get there in a second. When I press save, you can see here it says URL will be generated after you've pressed save. So if I copy that now, put it into my browser, it'll give me an error message, but we can fix that pretty quick. Wow, how many flows? Okay, it's this one. I need to change the method to get, because when we're looking at something with the browser, it's a GET request. Well, it's not always, but when we're looking at a web page, it is. So if I refresh that now, that's just going to say hello. That isn't HTML. If I put some HTML in here, if I make that HTML-ish, that will just print that out, because the default content type for that response is application stroke text. But if I change the content type from here, I put a content type header in, I'll copy it from this one, say text HTML. then we'll get the bold text and we'll lose the HTML tags. So that is literally being hosted by Power Automate. So that link in that email, this was a link to, in fact, that is a link to that Power Automate flow. So if I go back to that original flow, not that one. Not that one. Oh yeah, it's that one, I think. Let's just cut back on the tabs here. I'm a bit tab crazy. There we go. We can see that CC02, this is the URL generated by Power Automate that when it's hit, delivers all of that stuff back. So if we go back to our hello example here, I put hello, the time is, give me that I'm not going to do a format date time. And then refresh it. Does that make sense? So Flow is hosting the invoice page itself, and it is also the target for, it's also the target. So as you can see, there's a condition in here as well, that when that has been paid, that shows up there paid and the payment option has been removed. But if I put something in here, that the JavaScript in here is directed that at another flow. I'm regretting already going into the source. It's there. Submit customer query to flow. There is the URL. And if we look, it starts with 4C2F. We go back into my solution and we've got customer invoice query here. I edit that. We can see that's that 4C2F. And if we look in the run history, we can see that around 44 seconds ago when I typed that. Another one, go back to my run history. There it is. So the whole thing, the invoice page, the customer invoice query, the payment, everything is hosted on Power Automate. And it's, when I first started messing around with this, I just had this assumption that Power Automate would be a terrible web server because it would be slow. I don't know why I thought that, but I did. But it isn't. It's pretty quick, especially given that SharePoint isn't really the fastest of data sources. When you press that and you see all of that come back that quickly, it's pretty good. I was surprised that it was actually feasible to do, to be honest, but it is, and it works nicely. It is a bit faster from Dataverse than SharePoint, but there isn't loads in it. And you can also use it to, what's a really good use for it, and I've only started playing with this recently, instead of putting HTML inside the page, you can put, well, it's still HTML-ish, you can put an adaptive card that then submits data back into wherever you want, really, but it's, you can use it to host adaptive cards for external users. So if you just want to collect, you know, a small bit of information to finish a record off, adaptive cards, I think, are absolutely brilliant because they're such, the record, the way they update a record is so narrow in its scope that if you're only trying to get a yes or no response, you know, were you happy with your delivery or something like that, and they're absolutely perfect.
So I guess actually you could just put that in an email, like you said, to get a very quick response from a customer.
Yeah.
Send them an email with a link in it.
Exactly.
Happy yes or no, and it would just be calling that flow and do the update, whatever you want.
Yeah.
That's clever stuff. I can see that, like, you've built up. Started something simple, and then you've ended up with really quite a complex output, like you've got there, which looks like, oh my god, how did you do that? But I imagine it's lots of little steps.
it was lots of little steps. And if you go into Google and type HTML invoice template, the first result.
Now we see the secret.
That's it. I just took that, and if you see
so
it,
lots of, you just sort of copy paste that HTML with the CSS and all that kind of stuff. So
basically, that's all I do.
Looking invoice.
But
yeah,
that's how I make my living. Copying and pasting.
Yeah. I can see Victor's got his hand up. He has just answered a question in the chat. Actually, Victor, did you want to speak, or shall I read it out?
I can see it.
Yes. My question is, the URL generated dynamically there. Is there any way we could get that URL remotely without having to go in there and pick that URL manually?
Can we get the URL generated by a trigger? Well, it's static, that URL, so you only need to get it one time. So that one I've just created, this one that I named FDG, that URL was then created, and it is going to remain as that forever.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
I'm thinking about instances where we're moving flows between, between environments.
I see.
Rather than going in pre-prod production inside the flow and grabbing the URL manually, is there any way we could just retrieve it and put it somewhere for the users to just know, okay, this is what we need to call?
I don't know of a way. I wonder
is it the admin, the actions you've got for Power Platform admin, and you can return a JSON for all of your flows. Is it in that?
It might be. I think I know what you mean. I haven't been in there that much. You mean the Power Platform Admin Center? It's in one of the database tables, isn't it?
Yeah. And the other thing is, it might be in Center of Excellence kit. I don't know. I'm floundering a little bit. It's a good question, though.
It is a good question, one which I don't know the answer to.
I think that's a fair play. I think reaching back into my memory, isn't there, connector for those admin queries so that you can query your own, flows, and that's what the COE is using. It's like querying itself. I've been a bit vague there, but you may well be able to get to it.
Yeah, I'm not going to go and start poking around the admin center now.
Not now. Yeah, I think it's a good question, particularly moving flows between environments. I don't know if they would keep the
URL definitely change.
Yeah,
which is a shame.
It is a shame. I don't know. Environment variables were mentioned. I don't know if that sort of comes in. It's beyond my knowledge. But there's a few more questions.
Yeah, on the PDF thing, they want to try to. So you can do this on the PDF thing. You can application PDF, that works. I've done that. This is to download. This is so that it downloads the PDF, isn't it? Or you can view it in the browser. That works, and you can actually do that for all kinds of data types. So, for example, I had it's a question that comes up on the Power Automate community forum all the time: is how can I send an image in an email? And it sounds like a really simple thing to do, but sending an image inside an email is actually fraught with complications. And one of the things that I did was made a Power Automate HTTP image server, which uses the HTTP, when a HTTP request received, to send an image back to the email client, so that it doesn't have to be embedded inside the email. And the great thing about that is that if you're clever and you change the URL slightly for each recipient, you can use it for email tracking, like SendGrid and MailChimp and all those sorts of things. That's what they do. And you can do exactly the same thing. In fact, I think I've got a demo of it somewhere. So there is a YouTube video on it, but okay, so yeah, I've done exactly the same thing. I've given like 4 different ways of doing it, but Power Automate is a HTTPS web server, and then I'm just picking a picture ID from my SharePoint list. There's my SharePoint list there, and I think this will actually work. So if I go there, Nah, that flow's obviously long been deleted. I need to put it back. Oh, no, there it goes. So this is an image inside my SharePoint library, which I'm sharing out via one of those HTTP flows. So if I change this pick ID here from 24 to 23, there's an animated GIF in there. I mean, I don't know what else is in here, so I'm scared to change the ID very much, but I'm sure it's still fine. So this is exactly the same technique. I mean, the whole reason that I came up with this, actually, going back to your point about PDFs, is that Power Automate is really bad at turning HTML into PDF. And the word connector is great, and that actually does produce pretty nice PDF, but the word connector itself is a bit limited depending on what you want to do with it. So everyone can receive HTML. Every browser understands HTML more or less. So I just thought that was a nice workaround. Plus, you get to interact with the end user. You know it's been seen when it's been seen. And it's the same with, if you imagine this image had a query string on it to say customer ID 12345, they wouldn't see that when they're viewing the image, but when they download it and view it, you can track the fact that it's been viewed. So if that was important to you, doing these sorts of things using the HTTPS trigger, you can do a lot with it. And there is so much stuff built into, I'll show you another one. I'm just remembering all this stuff I've done. But if I'm running out of time, let me know.
I think we understand that if you're interested in Power Automate, your blog is a little gold mine. We've got a few more minutes, I think, and then we'll probably hand over to Neil. Do you want to just run through this, and then we have 2 more questions, I think?
Yeah. So if I create a new text document on my desktop and put something in it, I can just drop that onto this drop zone client, or not. Hang on. That's just a picture. There's the demo there. I can get that, drop it on there. That's just been uploaded to SharePoint. Again, so you can just take any JavaScript tool that's out there, and some of them have had stacks of work. And again, this only took me like half hour to make. So if you want to give a customer an upload tool into one of your SharePoint document libraries so they can share files with you, dead easy. I'll shut up now.
No, not at all. I think the point that I'm getting is that there is this whole world, obviously, of web development and the HTML and JavaScript tools, and they're all kind of usable with Power Automate in this very clever way, I think. So that's going to save people loads of time. Couple of questions. One was, this is from Dean, how do the costs stack up? I don't know if you've got any information on that, but I guess obviously it depends on consumption, but have you got any experience with customers on that?
Well, it was an issue, and it still would be an issue because you're limited by a number of API actions, but that I've used it with just a single Power Automate premium license. But now that the API limits have gone up so much.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's 40,000 API actions per day now. I think, I'm not sure. Could be 20,000.
It's 40,000 per user and 500,000 per tenant for non-interactive account.
Yeah.
Plus 5,000 per license user as well. Let's say if you have 100 users per tenant, then you will get 1 million per tenant request API limit per tenant.
But that is good information and actually answers the question. So, I mean, there are limits to it, but you'd have to be having a lot of requests to reach them these days. Before, when it was at 5,000, there was a risk of that depending on how much you used it. But
they don't. I mean, this is being recorded, isn't it? I probably shouldn't say they don't seem to be enforcing it either, but I'll keep my mouth shut.
No, they're not enforcing the Dataverse storage limits either, because I put 8 gig into one Dataverse for Teams.
They are starting it from April, I heard.
Okay,
yeah, they're locking stuff down more and more and more, so you can't rely on.
So my 5 million API requests a day is about to start costing me money.
So I haven't actually had any experience of it costing anything because I haven't reached the API limits.
What they do is, and I don't think this is secret information, if you're a noisy neighbor, as they term them, they've got all this telemetry behind the scenes, and if you're basically impacting performance of other people, Microsoft will knock on your door and say, you know, what can you do about this? And they'll give you a bit of time, and then at some point they will start charging you if they've actually got the ability to charge you for that certain thing. But yeah, the restrictions are coming in to be more strictly enforced. So it's always something you have to think about when you're designing solutions. There was one more question.
I know two of actually our customers, they start getting a messages from Microsoft that you're making a lot of noise.
Yeah.
But for the benefit of the tape, I did try and pay and I couldn't find the spoof for it. So
I'll share my bank account number.
There was one more question from Roy, which is a little bit more. It's not really technical. It's more sort of generic, but it's around like sending the invoice email out, which is, you know, obviously if you're sending a link to somebody in an email and saying click here, please, you know, there's definitely some people that would be a little bit reluctant to do that. You could send the invoice as an attachment, and that's possible with Power Automate. Any thoughts on like how you can kind of get people to view your invoices without it seeming dodgy?
Well, I mean, the normal way is to email it, isn't it? And if you trust the brand, if the email is clearly recognizable as being from a trusted brand with the right look and feel about it, then, you know, a lot of times they might click. Something that I've used that flow for is for customers to view their own statement. That's really good because it's completely dynamic, so they can get an up-to-date statement of their account. But because it is anonymous, you know, you have to be really careful about how you do that. But you know, there are so many different ways of using it. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, someone might be scared to click a link. I guess they.
Yeah, I guess you could have them log into a portal or something and then run the flow through the portal or something. I don't know. There's a million ways to skin a cat, isn't there? But okay. I don't think there's any more questions, but no, thanks very much, Paul. I think what's the key thing I've taken away is that you can build something quite complicated with lots of components. Obviously, you don't start off complicated, but you can build all kinds of stuff that I didn't even realize you could do that with Power Automate. So yeah, that's great stuff. Thank you very much. Round of applause.
I have one quick question. Can we use this functionality for surveys, or do you think that Microsoft will pin down if you start using something to record? Do you take some opinion, something related to survey, sending a link, and then get response back?
Do you know? I know I've said this so many times. I did a video on it and a blog post.
Drop your blog into the chat.
Yeah, I'll put into the chat the link to the blog post. And yeah, it works great, and in many ways better than Microsoft Forms. So I'll put a link to it.
Great stuff. Thank you. If you can come off mute, everybody, and give Paul a nice round of applause, that'd be great.
Thank you.